So, let's talk about where the modern military officer actually comes from. To do that, we have to wind the clock back to 19th century Prussia. It was there that a massive national crisis ended up forging the very blueprint for the professional officer corps that we recognize today.
You know, every military in the world has to wrestle with this one central question. How do you systematically build an entire army of leaders? Well, long before we had modern assessment centers and complex training programs, Prussia had to figure this out, and not for some academic exercise, but for its very survival. The system they came up with, well, it still echoes in armies all around the world.
All right, here's our game plan. First, we're going to look at the crisis that forced Prussia's hand in the first place. Then, we'll dive into the brand new path they created for becoming an officer, the schools they built to back it up, and finally, we'll size up its lasting legacy. Okay, let's get into it. Part 1. The catalyst for this huge change. This is a story that goes from total national humiliation to some truly radical, deep-seated reform.
Now, you might think the idea of educating officers is a pretty modern concept, but it's not. Even Frederick the Great knew that officers needed to do more than just follow orders. They had to, in his words, form their judgment. The problem was, this was just a nice idea. It wasn't a system. It would take an absolutely catastrophic failure to turn that ideal into a hard and fast requirement for everyone.
So, before 1806, everyone thought the Prussian army was the gold standard in Europe. Then came the Battle of Jena-Auerstedt, where Napoleon's forces just completely shattered that reputation. I mean, the shock to the nation was immense. But look how fast they responded. Within a single year, reformers like Schonhorst were tasked with rebuilding the army from the ground up. By 1808, brand new regulations were already in place to make sure a disaster like that could never, ever happen again.
All right, let's get to the real heart of that reform. How they forged a completely new kind of Prussian officer through a totally redesigned path to getting a commission.
The first big domino to fall was this: universal military service. All of a sudden, the ranks were filled with educated citizens, not just peasants or career soldiers. This created a huge new problem. How could an aristocratic officer corps lead men who might actually be more educated than they were? The answer was obvious. Officers could no longer lean on their noble birthright. They had to earn respect through superior intellect and real competence.
And this led to a new, and I mean arduous path to becoming an officer. First, you had to serve in the ranks, just like everybody else. Then, you had to pass an exam on civilian subjects to prove you were broadly educated. Only then did you go to a division school for 9 months, followed by a final, incredibly tough professional exam. And get this, even after clearing all those hurdles, the officers of your own regiment had to vote on whether or not they'd accept you. It was a serious filter.
So this whole examination system really rested on two big pillars. The first one, the ensign's exam, wasn't about the military at all. It tested your general knowledge, languages, math, history. Think of it like a requirement for a university degree today. It was a gate to make sure that candidates were well-rounded people first. Only after you passed that did you face the officer's exam, which was all business, tactics, fortifications, the real professional stuff. The message here was unmistakable. A great officer needs a solid foundation in both the liberal arts and the science of war.
Now, a system like this can't just run on ideas alone. You need infrastructure. So let's look at the institutional pillars Prussia built to support it all, a truly comprehensive system of schools.
They built an entire educational ecosystem. It started with cadet houses for the sons of officers, sure, but it also included professional schools for all candidates and the elite war school for the best of the best, the future staff officers. And, this is really important, it didn't just stop with the officers. The system also educated NCOs and even provided for the children of soldiers. This was a total statewide commitment to education, from the very top to the very bottom.
And believe me, this was no side project. The annual budget for these schools in 1856 was over $250,000 thalers. That was a massive national investment for the time. It just goes to show that Prussia saw military education not as an expense, but as a core pillar of its national security. They were literally paying for intellectual superiority on the battlefield.
So, what does this all add up to? Well, it brings us to the Prussian legacy. This whole system created an entirely new standard of military professionalism, one that would end up influencing armies all across the globe. If there is one single sentence that captures the soul of this entire reform, it's this one, from the 1808 regulations. It completely severed the link between your social status and your military rank. From that point forward,
Your claim to be an officer wasn't about your family name. It was about your knowledge in peacetime and your courage in wartime. In an era that was defined by aristocracy, this was a revolutionary idea.
Okay, let's boil this all down to its core principles. First, a broad education is the bedrock of good leadership. Second, merit, proven by exams, trumps birthright, period. Third, developing officers is a career-long process that the state needs to invest in. And finally, the whole point isn't to create obedient robots, it's to foster adaptable, thinking leaders. You can literally see the DNA of these principles in almost every professional officer corps in the world today.
So that leaves us with a final question to think about. For the modern military of the 21st century, which one of these foundational Prussian principles do you think is the most crucial for success? Is it universal service? Is it the demand for rigorous education? Or is it that relentless focus on meritocratic examination?
For those of you who want to dig deeper, the details for this briefing came from an incredibly thorough 1857 British report, which studied Prussia's system as a model for their own reforms. Thanks for joining us.